A white bus, 15 children, a dream that became Colombia's worst nightmare. Imagine for a moment that your child leaves home one morning full of hope, wearing their cleanest sports uniform, carrying their dreams of glory, and never comes home again. Imagine living 28 years without knowing if they're alive, if they suffered, if they remembered you in their final moments. This is not fiction. This happened to 15 families on March 15, 1989. An entire youth soccer team disappeared without a trace in the Colombian mountains. No witnesses, no clues, no explanation. The authorities failed. The media forgot. The families never gave up. What secret did those mountains keep for 3 decades? Why couldn't anyone find an entire bus with 16 people? The answer would forever change what we believed we knew about this case. And when the truth finally emerged from the depths of the earth, it was more devastating than anyone imagined. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. In March 1989, the small city of Valledupar, Colombia, was living its most hopeful days. The violence that plagued the country seemed distant in that mountainous corner, where farming families found refuge in their passion for soccer. The White Angels, the most promising youth team in the region, were preparing for the most important tournament of their lives. 15 children between 12 and 14 years old made up the squad. Their immaculate white uniforms shone under the Andean sun as a symbol of purity and hope. The coach, Roberto Mendoza, a 50-year-old man who had dedicated his life to training young talent, saw in these boys the opportunity to prove that soccer could be more powerful than poverty. On March 15th, a white bus arrived early at the Central Plaza. Parents gathered to say goodbye to their children who would travel to Bogotá to participate in the National Youth Championship. Mothers adjusted uniforms, fathers gave last-minute advice, and the children couldn't contain their excitement. The driver, Miguel Herrera, was known in the region for his experience on the dangerous mountain roads. He had transported sports teams for more than 20 years without a single accident. His bus, though old, was in perfect mechanical condition. At 6 in the morning, the vehicle departed amid tears of happiness and pride. The children waved from the windows, while their families bid them farewell with blessings. No one imagined that this image would be forever etched in Valledupar's collective memory. The route to Bogotá involved crossing the treacherous Eastern Cordillera, known for its deadly precipices and sharp curves. However, Miguel knew every inch of that road. The weather was favorable, and everything seemed perfect for the journey. The first kilometers passed without incident. The bus advanced along the main highway, while the young players sang soccer songs and shared their dreams of glory. Roberto Mendoza constantly checked his player list, making sure everyone was comfortable and safe. At 10 in the morning, Roberto made the last recorded communication with the authorities in Valledupar. His voice sounded calm and optimistic when he reported they had made a technical stop in the town of Aguachica. The children were well, had eaten breakfast, and would continue the journey in 30 minutes. That was the last time anyone heard from the White Angels. The families anxiously awaited the call confirming their safe arrival in Bogotá. Hours passed slowly. At noon, concern began to grow among the parents. At 4 in the afternoon, the Valledupar mayor's office received the first desperate calls. Maria Elena Vasquez, mother of Carlos, the team captain, was the first to alert authorities. Her maternal intuition screamed that something terrible had happened. Soon other mothers joined the anguish, creating a chain of worry that spread throughout the city. The mayor, Fernando Gutierrez, immediately organized a search operation. He contacted the national police and traffic authorities in the departments the bus should have passed through. However, the response was discouraging. No authority had registered the vehicle's passage after Aguachica. The first hypothesis was a road accident. Rescue teams began traveling the route, checking every curve, every precipice, every place where a bus could have suffered an accident, but they found nothing. During the night, families gathered at the town church. Father Joaquin led a collective prayer, while mothers wept and fathers maintained increasingly fragile hope. The younger siblings of the players didn't understand why their families were so sad. Local authorities, limited by resources and technology, extended the search to a radius of 200 kilometers. Air Force helicopters joined the operation, but the Colombian mountains guard their secrets jealously. The following days became a calvary for the families of Valledupar. The search intensified with the participation of volunteers from throughout the region. Farmers, students, merchants, all joined in an unprecedented operation to find the White Angels. The accident theory began to crumble when rescue teams completed their review of the entire official route. No traces of the bus, no signs of impact, no evidence that it had traveled through the most dangerous places on the road. More sinister theories then emerged. In 1989, Colombia was experiencing an era of extreme violence. Drug cartels, paramilitary groups, and guerrillas kept the country in a state of terror. The possibility of a mass kidnapping began circulating among investigators. Colonel Ramirez, in charge of the investigation, explored this line. However, no armed group claimed responsibility. Kidnappers usually demanded ransoms or made political demands, but in this case, only silence reigned. Families organized daily marches demanding answers. Maria Elena Vasquez became the spokesperson for the parents, confronting authorities who seemed more concerned with closing the case than finding the truth. Her statements on local radio kept hope and social pressure alive. National media began covering the story. The case of the White Angels became a symbol of the vulnerability of humble families to violence and institutional incompetence. However, media attention also brought opportunists who offered false clues in exchange for money. After 3 months of fruitless searching, authorities officially declared the case as mass disappearance of unknown cause. Families refused to accept this resolution, but lacked resources to continue private investigation. The community of Valledupar never forgot their lost children. Every year on March 15th, a commemorative mass was held at the town church. The white uniforms became a sacred symbol of memory and hope. The case of the White Angels gradually faded from national headlines, but never disappeared from the heart of Valledupar. Families learned to live with the most painful uncertainty, not knowing if their children were alive or dead, if they suffered, if they remembered them in their final moments. Maria Elena Vasquez never stopped searching. Every month she traveled to different cities following clues that arrived through anonymous letters or phone calls. She spent her savings, sold her belongings, and dedicated her life to keeping alive the memory of her son Carlos and his teammates. The younger siblings of the players grew up marked by absence. Many developed psychological problems, being unable to process their brother's disappearance. Families divided. Some parents sank into depression, others found strength in faith, and a few moved from Valledupar to escape painful memories. Roberto Mendoza, the coach, never recovered from the feeling of guilt. Although authorities never held him responsible, he felt guilty for having convinced parents to allow the trip. He abandoned soccer and dedicated himself to humble work, avoiding any contact with the sport he once loved. Driver Miguel Herrera was also thoroughly investigated. His family suffered the stigma of suspicion, though no evidence of negligence or criminal participation was ever found. His wife, Elena, defended his memory until the day she died, insisting that Miguel was an honest and responsible man. During the 90s, reports occasionally appeared of people who claimed to have seen some of the children in different parts of the country. These leads were meticulously followed, but always turned out to be cases of mistaken identity or extortion attempts. Violence in Colombia continued escalating during that decade. Thousands of families suffered similar disappearances, and the case of the White Angels was lost among the horror statistics that defined that era. However, in Valledupar, the flame of hope never completely extinguished. By 2010, a new generation had grown up in Valledupar. The children of those who were kids in 1989 heard the stories of the White Angels as urban legends. Some believed it had been an accident, others thought of kidnappings, and the youngest simply considered it part of local folklore. Andres Vasquez, Maria Elena's younger son, became a journalist motivated by his mother's obsession with the case. He had grown up watching her consume herself searching for answers, and decided he would use his professional skills to give definitive closure to the family tragedy. At 28 years old, Andres worked for a regional newspaper, but his true passion was investigating cold cases. He had studied criminology as a second career and developed contacts in police forces and rescue groups. His first action was to digitize all the files from the original case. He discovered that many documents had been lost or deteriorated, but he managed to reconstruct a detailed chronology of the initial investigation. What he found surprised him. There were significant inconsistencies in official testimonies. The testimony of the last stop in Aguachica didn't match local gas station records. According to the files, no bus with the characteristics of the White Angels vehicle had stopped there on March 15, 1989. Andrés began to suspect that Roberto Mendoza had lied about the location of the last communication. But why would he have done that? The coach had died in 2005, taking his secrets to the grave. This discrepancy became the first thread of an investigation that would forever change understanding of the case. Andrés decided to personally travel the entire original route, but this time with the eyes of a professional investigator and modern technology. His mother, Maria Elena, now 60 years old, was skeptical. She had seen so many false hopes that she preferred to keep her expectations low. However, deep in her heart, a small flame of hope reignited. In March 2017, exactly 28 years after the disappearance, Andrés Vázquez undertook his field investigation. Equipped with GPS, high-definition cameras, and updated maps, he began systematically traveling all possible routes the bus could have taken. His methodology was simple but effective. Interview people who lived in the area in 1989 and still retained memories from that time. Many farmers and local merchants had died or moved away, but some elderly people maintained intact memories. In the town of San Vicente, 40 kilometers from the official route, Andrés found Doña Carmen, an 80-year-old woman who had run a small store since the 70s. Her memories were extraordinarily detailed. Carmen clearly remembered the day a white bus with children had passed through her town. It wasn't common to see passenger vehicles on that secondary road, so the image had been etched in her memory. The children wore white uniforms and looked excited. The most shocking part of her testimony was the date. She assured it had been March 15, 1989, the same day of the disappearance. This meant the bus had taken an alternative route, moving away from the main highway for unknown reasons. Andrés verified official records of that secondary route. Indeed, it had not been included in the original search. The 1989 investigators had assumed the bus would follow the direct route to Bogotá, ignoring possible detours. The secondary road serpentined through mountains, even more dangerous than the main route. It was known for its deep precipices and tight curves. Few drivers ventured there, especially with a heavy vehicle like a bus. Andrés contacted current local authorities to propose a search in that area. However, the response was discouraging. After so many years, they considered it almost impossible to find evidence. Additionally, the area was difficult to access and required specialized resources that were not available. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, Andrés decided to organize a private expedition. He contacted a group of experienced mountaineers and rescue specialists who agreed to participate as volunteers. On April 12, 2017, the expedition organized by Andrés Vázquez began systematic exploration of the mountainous zone. The group consisted of 6 people: Andrés, 2 expert mountaineers, a rescue specialist, a geologist, and a documentary photographer. The search concentrated on the deepest ravines in the region, places where a vehicle could have fallen and remained hidden by vegetation for decades. They used drones with high-resolution cameras to explore areas inaccessible on foot. For 3 days, the expedition traveled valleys and precipices without finding traces of the bus. Tropical vegetation had grown enormously in 28 years, creating a dense green curtain that hid the terrain. Some group members began showing signs of discouragement. On the 4th day, while exploring a particularly deep ravine near the Magdalena River, the drone captured an anomalous image. Among the undergrowth, about 60 meters deep, a light-colored metallic structure stood out among the jungle greens. The group's excitement was palpable, but so was caution. Many times, rock formations or industrial waste had created false hopes. However, the shape and size of the structure coincided with the dimensions of a bus. The descent into the ravine was extremely dangerous. The mountaineers installed a pulley and rope system to reach the bottom of the precipice. Andrés, despite his inexperience in mountaineering, insisted on being the first to descend. What he found forever changed his life and the history of Valledupar. The remains of the white bus lay crushed between 2 enormous rocks, partially covered by decades of vegetation. The structure was severely damaged but still recognizable. Inside the vehicle, partially preserved by the mountain's climatic conditions, they found the remains of 16 people. The white uniforms, though deteriorated, were still visible on some bodies. Personal objects were also recovered: soccer balls, medals, family photographs. The bus's location explained why it had never been found. It had fallen into a natural crack between two precipices, creating a kind of rocky tomb that completely hid it from above. Only from the drone's specific angle had it been possible to detect it. Initial forensic analyses revealed that the bus had suffered a catastrophic accident. Evidence indicated that the vehicle had lost control on a sharp curve, overturned, and fallen down the precipice. The impact had been instantaneous and fatal for all occupants. Forensic investigators, led by Dr. Ramirez, determined that the accident had occurred during the early hours of March 15, 1989. The bodies showed signs of massive trauma compatible with a fall from great height, but no evidence of prior violence. Accident reconstruction revealed several contributing factors. The secondary road conditions were terrible in 1989, with significant erosion and lack of signage. The bus's weight, combined with the speed necessary to climb the slopes, had created a high-risk situation. Mechanical analyses of the vehicle showed that the brakes had partially failed. The braking system, though functional, was not adequate for the demands of that mountainous road. Miguel Herrera, the driver, had fought to maintain control, but the physical forces were impossible to overcome. Personal objects recovered told the story of the final moments. Letters the children had written to their families during the trip were found, expressing their excitement and love. Photographs they had taken during the first hours of the journey were also recovered. The question that tormented everyone was, why had Miguel Herrera taken that secondary route? Analyses of maps from that era showed that this road was technically a shortcut to Bogotá, though much more dangerous. It's possible the driver had wanted to save time and fuel. Roberto Mendoza, the coach, had lied about the location of the last communication, probably to protect the driver's reputation or to prevent families from knowing they had taken an unauthorized route. The truth, though painful, had finally come to light. The White Angels had died in a tragic accident, not in an act of violence. Their bodies had remained in the mountains for 28 years, waiting to be found and receive the dignity of a proper burial. News of the discovery shocked Colombia, and especially Valledupar. Families who had waited for decades finally had answers, though not the ones they secretly hoped for. The hope of finding their children alive vanished forever. Maria Elena Vasquez, now 60 years old, experienced a mixture of relief and devastation. On one hand, the uncertainty had ended. On the other, confirmation of her son Carlos's death was a brutal blow. However, she expressed gratitude for finally being able to give him a dignified burial. The process of identifying the remains was meticulous and respectful. Forensic experts worked with families to confirm each victim's identity using dental records, personal objects, and DNA analysis when possible. Each family recovered their child after almost 3 decades. The repatriation of the remains became an event of national importance. The Colombian government organized an official ceremony to honor the White Angels. The President of the Republic offered posthumous apologies for the failures in the original investigation. In Valledupar, families organized a collective funeral that brought together the entire community. The town church wasn't sufficient to accommodate all attendees. The 15 coffins, covered with white blankets, were carried in procession through the streets where the children had played soccer. Roberto Mendoza and Miguel Herrera were posthumously exonerated of any criminal responsibility. The investigation concluded they had been victims of circumstances, deficient roads, lack of safety regulations, and equipment inadequate for geographical conditions. Families established a fund to build a memorial at the accident site. The monument, a sculpture of 15 angels in soccer uniforms, became a symbol of hope and memory. Road safety improvements were also implemented in the region. Andres Vasquez wrote a book about the investigation, titled The White Angels: 28 Years of Search. Copyright proceeds were donated to organizations that help families of missing persons. His work inspired other investigators to reopen similar cold cases. 5 years after the discovery, Valledupar had found a way to honor the memory of the White Angels by transforming tragedy into hope. The case had become an example of family perseverance and the importance of never abandoning the search for truth. The White Angels Foundation, established by the families, helped other Colombian families with disappearance cases. They used the painful but valuable experience acquired over decades to provide psychological, legal, and logistical support to those facing similar situations. Maria Elena Vasquez, who became the foundation's president, found in service to others a way to give meaning to suffering. Her story inspired mothers throughout Latin America who were searching for their missing children. She became a symbol of resistance and hope. The memorial at the accident site became a pilgrimage destination for families who had lost loved ones. Visitors from across the country came to leave flowers, letters, and personal objects. The place radiated a strange peace, as if the children's spirits had finally found rest. Andrés Vázquez's investigation had established new protocols for searching for missing persons in Colombia. Authorities adopted more advanced technologies and more systematic methodologies. Training programs for investigators were implemented based on lessons learned from the case. Sports also paid permanent tribute. The National Youth Soccer Tournament was renamed the White Angels Cup. Each year, 15 children from humble families receive complete sports scholarships in memory of the lost players. The story of the White Angels transcended Colombian borders. International documentaries, books, and films narrated the tragedy and the tireless search. The case is studied in universities as an example of criminal investigation and family perseverance. In the mountains where the accident occurred, nature has continued its eternal cycle. Trees grow taller, flowers bloom each spring, and birds sing without knowing the place's history. However, those who know the truth see in that natural beauty a reminder that life continues, honoring those who are no longer here. The memory of the White Angels remains alive in every child who plays soccer in Valledupar, in every mother who doesn't give up in the face of adversity, in every investigator who tirelessly seeks truth. Their legacy transcends tragedy, becoming a testament to the power of family love and the importance of never losing hope. The story that began with 15 children dressed in white, pursuing a dream, ended with a universal lesson, that truth, though painful, is always preferable to uncertainty, and that a family's love can literally move mountains until finding answers that seemed impossible to obtain. If you've made it this far and want to see more stories like this, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. Leave a like so we can keep sharing more stories like this. See you next time.